The Whips have agreed that the following matter will be considered next. Item 17, the motion on airport expansions, followed by item 18, the motion on private renting in Wandsworth. I now call upon Councillor Govindia to formally move and Councillor Senior to second the motion on airport expansion.
Madam Mayor, I formally move the motion on Heathrow expansion on paper 15295, and on that, may I, on reception of the motion, move a small amendment under A Roman 3, where it says more planes flying over our borough every day, that it should in fact read more planes flying over London every day. So with that amendment on reception of the motion.
Second.
And subject to that amendment, perhaps moving the split infinitive, I formally second that amendment.
Councillor Crivelli to speak, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I wish to support the motion before the Council this evening. Like the majority of Putney residents, I was particularly dismayed at the findings of the Davis Commission published last week. When reading the Commission's report, it is apparent that the Davis Commission has not given anywhere near enough serious consideration to the tremendous impact that Heathrow expansion, and a third runway in particular, has on southwest London. With 67 million passengers, and despite expansion at Amsterdam and Frankfurt airports, Heathrow remains the busiest in the world in terms of international passenger traffic. I'm sure this fact comes as no surprise to Wandsworth residents, who are obliged to tolerate the environmental impact of Heathrow on a daily basis. It is a statement of fact that Heathrow is simply an airport in the wrong place. To quote the Mayor of London, it is a planning error from the 1950s and 60s. This is self-evident, as it's an airport that occupies a constrained site where growth cannot be achieved without bulldozing and tarmacking over 750 homes. This planning error will be compounded if the third runway is used to capacity, as it will double the number of passengers passing through the airport and lead to 220,000 extra planes flying over southwest London every year. All airports cause disruption, but it's important to minimise the disruption as far as possible. The problem is that no airport in Europe comes close to matching the noise footprint of Heathrow. According to the Airports Commission, Heathrow already causes 4 times as much noise as any other airport in Europe. It is astonishing that the Commission would favour development at Heathrow over Gatwick, when Heathrow's noise affects 70 times more people than those at Gatwick. The incredible levels of airport noise from Heathrow are best demonstrated through the fact that Heathrow causes more than double the amount of noise of all of the airports in the UK combined. How does the Commission, in these circumstances, logically conclude that it's environmentally feasible to expand Heathrow? The Davis report acknowledges that a third runway would increase noise pollution for local people by about 50%. A disproportionate amount of that noise pollution is already borne by residents in Wandsworth. The arguments over noise are often dismissed as narrow-minded NIMBYism, but airplane noise is not just a matter of irritation. It has very real physical and psychological impacts. Airplane noise is linked to productivity losses and health complications such as hypertension, hearing loss and mental health problems. According to the Airport Commission itself, over 20 studies have shown negative effects of aircraft noise on reading ability and memory development in children. It is clear that Heathrow is already exposing Wandsworth residents to unacceptable levels of noise, and we should be talking about how to reduce noise at Heathrow, not about exposing hundreds of thousands of people to even more absurd noise levels. The Commission's report surprisingly makes no mention of any need for special measures to manage down road traffic or mitigate vehicle emissions, although road traffic conditions in terms of vehicle numbers would be affected by increasing Heathrow's capacity. This will inevitably put pressure on the road network around southwest London. Efforts by Wandsworth Council to reduce emissions and improve air quality will be undermined significantly by increased passenger capacity. The lack of consideration given to the impact on the road network in neighbouring boroughs is a serious omission in a report that is clearly flawed. The proponents of an expanded Heathrow tell us that an expanded Heathrow is essential so that London remains attractive to business. This is a very large myth that needs to be nailed. There is no hard evidence that the London economy will lose out if Heathrow doesn't expand. To the contrary, economists CL Delft, in their report, The Economics of Heathrow Expansion, pointed out that a third runway was not required at Heathrow because for business as a whole, other factors such as the vibrancy of London's financial centre, the time zone and language were of greater importance than the size of Heathrow. The choice that's before us is to support a costly and highly disruptive third runway at Heathrow or a second runway at Gatwick that is more deliverable, costs less to the taxpayer and will affect a smaller number of residents. It is the Government and Parliament that will ultimately make the decision, but it is essential that Wandsworth maintains its continued opposition so that in the long term the undeliverable proposals for Heathrow expansion can be ruled out once and for all.
Councillor Carpenter.
Thank you. I'm afraid you get me again. Madam Mayor, can I start by saying that the opposition is in complete agreement with the majority party's motion and will be voting for it. I will confess to not having read the whole of the Airport Commission's report, but I have read the 17-page executive summary, which reads more like a polemic in favour of Heathrow than a balanced judgment of an independent commission. This is not the first time that Sir Howard Davis's judgment has been brought into question. You will recall that in 2011 he had to resign as director of the LSE because he thought it was a good idea to take money from Colonel Gaddafi. I think we all agree that a third runway at Heathrow is not politically deliverable, but I'm surprised that as an economist Howard Davis thinks it is financially deliverable. I'm a businessman. If I was given the choice of investing £7 billion for a second runway in Gatwick, or £17 billion, plus another £5 billion for public infrastructure upgrades, although if you talk to TfL they think it's more like £10 billion, for a third runway at Heathrow, that's 3 times as much. And I was going to get a similar return on my investment. I know which one I would choose, Gatwick. But it's worse than that. Because of the size and complexity of the Heathrow project, it would take some 5 years longer to deliver the third runway at Heathrow than a second runway at Gatwick. So not only do I have to put up 3 times as much money, but I have to wait another 5 years before I get any return on it. The numbers just do not stack up. So my advice to Gatwick is this. The Commission has said that a second runway at Gatwick is a viable proposition. Get on with applying for planning permission and you'll kill the third runway at Heathrow stone dead. Locally, it will be very difficult to deliver the Heathrow option against the opposition of the Mayor of London. We know that both the leading Labour and Conservative candidates for Mayor, Sadiq Khan and Zach Goldsmith, are against Heathrow expansion. I suspect that any candidate that supported Heathrow expansion would be unelectable. So, the finances are for Gatwick, the politics are for Gatwick. I trust the leader will use his influence to ensure that the government is for Gatwick. And if he's successful in doing that, he may indeed be remembered as a Lyndon Johnson rather than a President Ford.
Councillor Field.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I support the motion. Last Friday, I stepped out of my back door and for some real blue sky thinking and observation of the flight paths. I counted 5 aircraft crossing the sky at various heights, some leaving vapor trails. Imagine probably twice or as many or even more crossing our London airspace if Heathrow third runway takes place, with the proposed increase in planes and the probable concerns of congested airspace. Now, I'm a well-travelled person. I've used most of Europe's airports and the UK's, and I can well remember the chaos and disruption caused by delayed flights and cancellations. It just needs 3 planes arriving at Heathrow simultaneously and offloading hundreds of pent-up passengers confronted by "Welcome to Britain," with the ensuing frustration and groan reaction at passport control in Terminal 5, something I experienced last week. Welcome to Heathrow. Imagine the volume of people providing images of glum and disgruntled business and holiday passengers. something we often see on the TV, chaos reigns. It is hoped that whatever is decided will be decided quickly by the government. Planning of infrastructure and budgeting and borrowing requirements need to be in place and properly forecast. The potential for delays on the process and further challenges are disruptive to people's lives and homes and business expansion plans and opportunities. I believe the Commission's report on Heathrow is flawed. It fails in many areas. It fails to deal with or reveal new flight paths, people's livelihood and general well-being. It will decimate a massive area and the real impact on houses and amenity. It is people we are talking about here. Excessive levels of air pollution are currently being experienced. More planes means more air pollution and costly challenge to combat higher levels. Who will pay? Will there be restrictions as a result of carbon emissions? The report widely underestimates the number who will fly out of Gatwick in future years. They state 40 million will do so by 2024. Fact, 38.7 million passed through in 2014. It's likely to hit the target of 40 million this year alone. And that's with one runway at Gatwick. Sir Howard Davis wishes to provide, and I quote, a package of environmental measure to make the airport a better neighbour for its local communities. He suggests various schemes and compensation. He talks about insulation and steeper flight paths on landing aircraft, curved approaches to reduce noise, and a ban on any night flying with more flights by day to compensate. Manageable pollution? Do we really know, and do they? What all this will mean and the constant impact on the community. What is Sadiq Khan MP or mayoral candidate's stance? A turnaround on thinking, I believe. He was for Heathrow and now against. His priority right now is in street life is carrying out research survey to find the best curry house in Tooting. Gatwick has some economic advantages, Davis says. Yes, as do many. I agree there is huge potential and space for a second runway, tremendous opportunities for more jobs and business potential for improving transport links and infrastructure throughout the South London corridor. Gatwick can deliver, all without the pain of Heathrow, the worrying and potentially spiralling cost and uncertainty. I reject the Heathrow recommendation, and so do many residents in this area of London. It is their living and breathing environment, and a significant impact would be felt by the next generation, living and working under the flight path. We must stand shoulder to shoulder with our boroughs and amenity groups who oppose Heathrow, overpolluted, overplaned, over us, and probably underfunded. I urge you to support the motion, and I support the considerable work already done by the leader, Councillor Govindia. Thank you.
Councillor Leonie Cooper.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Fellow councillors, I was elected to serve as a Wandsworth councillor first in 2006, and we debated Heathrow expansion during my first term. And I was able to speak in that debate, and I both spoke and voted against Heathrow expansion then. I was re-elected in 2010, and we again talked about Heathrow expansion, and again I was able to speak in that debate and to vote against Heathrow expansion, having spoken about it. And here we are again. But this time I've changed my... No, I haven't. Just kidding, just kidding. I haven't changed my mind. Despite the recommendations in Howard Davis's Airport Commission report launched just last week, that there should be a third runway at Heathrow, I think, like all of us, I remain firmly against expansion at Heathrow. Why? 4 main reasons, which some of the previous speakers have touched on, but which I would like to just touch on briefly as well. Noise pollution is the first and probably the largest reason. As aircraft descend on the westerly descent westbound over London, the impact on many parts of London, but especially in our borough on Battersea and Putney, are absolutely appalling. And we've all spoken to people on the doorstep who, from about 6 o'clock in the morning, as the flights start to come in every 45 seconds, and they're just woken very, very early and can't get back to sleep. And frankly, it's pretty dreadful now. Imagine what it would be like with further expansion. No other airport in Europe delivers this level of noise pollution. Fact. Air pollution in London, and we do have significant problems here in the borough, in various parts of Wandsworth, hovers above and indeed beyond the EU's legal limits. And Heathrow already contributes plentifully to that pollution without any further expansion. Thirdly, Heathrow expansion, and this is not something that affects us so much, but I think it's something, and certainly there will be colleagues on both sides who will know MPs and other councillors for those areas, but it will actually lead to many communities in West London being broken up and families being evicted. And that's really something that I can't support in, just for airport expansion even further. And fourthly, think of the amount of money that will need to be spent and the further disruption of bringing in further access routes into Heathrow if it becomes even larger. Look at what was required to actually get Terminal 5 into operation. Further expansion at Heathrow is just not viable. We need to focus on making sure the alternatives are explored and then implemented. And here's, in my view, some things that need to be done. First of all, I think we do need to still encourage freight to be rerouted. We don't need any freight going in and out of Heathrow, and that will do some to relieve the pressure there and help to reduce the clamour for another runway. Short-haul flights, and it's still more than 20% of flights in and out of Heathrow, short-haul flights to nearby European destinations can be rerouted to come in and out of Gatwick, obviously, but also Luton, Stansted and London City Airport. And I can see nods around the chamber for that. And it's something I'm sure that we're all very, very keen to see. Thirdly, Gatwick needs to be expanded. Runway alternation, actually, I was there only last week, and I do wonder how safe it is as you see one flight coming in and then another taking off. It really doesn't feel very safe, and we did a large circle around as we were coming into land on my flight coming back from Croatia, and it had to be timed pretty precisely to make sure that the flight that was about to take off took off and gave us enough time to land. So actually a second runway, I think, would help with safety, and it would also help with making sure that flights that leave and depart from Gatwick, you don't have as many delays. But additionally, of course, and this has been touched on, I think there would be huge benefits to this borough from the upgrading of the infrastructure to get us down to Gatwick. For Clapham Junction, I think it would be fantastic, as well as obviously for East Croydon Station. So please support this motion, and please oppose a third runway at Heathrow. Thank you.
Councillor Lure.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The conclusions on the Commission into airport capacity in South East England are fundamentally very disappointing, not just to thousands of Wandsworth residents, but also to the remainder of the population of the United Kingdom. In reaching their conclusions, the Airport Commission's report appears to have reached its conclusions without any sort of basis to the actual facts on the ground. They seem to have fit their facts to the conclusion they wished to reach, which was basically an expansion of Heathrow, and on the flimsy grounds of economic viability. The economic case for Heathrow expansion is in itself flawed, as Councillor Carpenter pointed out, and I won't go into that in any more detail. However, I would like to go into a little more detail on the effects it would have on individuals underneath the flight path, and also about the strategic damage that this would do to the UK's place in the world. People in Putney who live under the flight path, such as myself and many of the residents in my ward, are regularly dealing with flights starting at 4:30 in the morning and now throughout the day, as well pointed out, every 45 seconds. The suggestion of the Airports Commission is that those should be subject to more noise pollution alongside increasing the already terrible high levels of air pollution across this city. From a quality of life perspective, which I note the Commission has taken very limited heed of, this decision would blight the lives of up to 1 million or more Londoners, a good number of these here in our borough. Wandsworth residents, as has already been mentioned and has been mentioned in the motion, have already overwhelmingly expressed their opposition to Heathrow expansion, as have residents of many neighbouring boroughs. All of us in this chamber want Wandsworth to be a thriving and attractive place to live. Bluntly, having a huge number of aircraft flying over the borough on a daily basis does nothing to enhance that, and residents would be rightly angered that this report takes little heed of their concerns.
Madam Mayor, would Councillor Lewis
Please do.
take a brief intervention? Madam Mayor, like Councillor Cooper, I've spoken about the airport on a number of occasions in this chamber, and Councillor Lewis makes comment about the safety aspect. Nobody's really commented, and the Commission certainly doesn't look at it. The bottom line is anybody who builds an airport to the west of a conurbation where the prevailing wind is from the west needs their heads examined. You need only to look at the examples of other major airports around the world, whether it's Schiphol or Charles de Gaulle or JFK or O'Hare or Hong Kong or anywhere else. The prevailing winds are taken into consideration, and you don't build an airport where vast bombs effectively are flying over the city, which are in danger of crashing to the ground, and that hasn't been taken into consideration. And as I say, anybody who builds an airport...
Can I just wind up? Please. 30 seconds. Thank you. Councillor Lowe.
Councillor Madden is correct, and in the last 2 weeks we've been reminded about the horrors of jihadist terrorism and their attacks on British people, and it perhaps is a salutary tale that it wouldn't be too hard to hijack a plane and fly it into any part of West London if that were a terrorist aim. On the second point of the strategic standpoint of the UK, I will not deny there's a need to expand capacity in the southeast of England. Indeed, it is vital that we do so to compete with our European neighbours as a whole and maintain London's place as the premier city on earth. However, this decision from a strategic transport perspective, to build a third runway at Heathrow is also flawed, perhaps in a more fundamental way than any of the other arguments in Sir Howard's report. It is likely that airport capacity in the southeast would have to be increased again within 15 years. This could be sooner, taking into account the rapid advance in air travel and the continuing popularity of cheap flights to ever wider destinations. When this time comes, which in reality would have to be considered much sooner, Heathrow could not be an option. There simply would not be the room. So the proposal to expand Heathrow is one of a final hurrah to maintain its position as the largest airport in the UK for a few more years, only for that to stop and a new site would have to be found. Surely, considering that this decision had been put off for a considerable period of time, it would have been prudent to have made a decision that would have mitigated taking this decision a second time within a decade, with all of the potential pitfalls that may entail. However, it appears that this was lost on the Commission, and they have, in the well-worn phrase, kicked the can a little further down the road, and they have saved the argument for another day rather than addressing the underlying problem of British airport capacity. I personally believe this is a terrible decision for everyone in London and in the southeast of England and the country at large. In general, we have yet again set ourselves up to be undermined by our competitors. What is especially irksome about the Commission's decision is that there is a viable alternative, Gatwick. While considered by the Commission, it is almost rejected out of hand without much more than a second thought. Gatwick will not only reduce the numbers affected by noise and air pollution, but also provide a strategic solution to this thorny issue. Already, Gatwick provides space, embryonic transport links, and a well-run organisation. I do not deny that there are challenges to development at Gatwick, as Councillor Cooper pointed out, but they are arguably less than those presented at Heathrow. The Leader of the Council and the Member of Parliament for Putney in particular have been involved in the campaign to prevent expansion at Heathrow for both of the reasons that I've already stated. But also, vitally, they have proposed a solution to the problem in the form of Gatwick. This is viable, sustainable in the long term, and in the interests of Wandsworth residents, Londoners, and all the residents of the South East. It is also right that Wandsworth Council continues to work with our partners in persuading the government that Gatwick is the best sustainable option for airport expansion in the South East. And on this basis, I urge the Council to support this motion.
There is now a 10-minute speech by Councillor Senior.
Madam Mayor, I hope I won't take that long, and I will try to keep my remarks as brief as I can. Unlike the report, which isn't exactly brief. Unfortunately, unlike Councillor Carpenter, I have actually read the report. And in a way, it was a bit of a waste of my time, because I would be better off just reading a few press releases from Heathrow Airport Limited. Because what the report does is to constantly vaguely talk up the chances of Gatwick and then smash them down with relentless pro-Heathrow rhetoric. It is quite an astonishingly one-sided report. There is one good thing I would like to draw our attention to. As you're all probably aware, there are two options at Heathrow. One for a new northern runway, which is the option the report endorses. The other one to extend the existing northern runway and use it effectively as two runways. An interesting idea. Unfortunately, it doesn't work, as the report identifies, because of congestion on the ground at Heathrow, but also, crucially, as far as we're concerned, because it will lead to a pretty much complete end to the respite arrangements that we currently benefit from in terms of noise. So at least it's got rid of that one. Unfortunately, it brings in something almost as bad in the new northern runway option, which, as we've all heard, has all sorts of problems with it. It's an extremely expensive option to begin with. We've talked about the very large costs. Councillor Carpenter has quite rightly pointed out. It involves very considerable public subsidy as well in terms of improvements to infrastructure. That could be anywhere between £5 billion and £20 billion on top of the cost of actually building the runway and the associated terminal. The costs of expanding Gatwick, both the public sector and the private sector, are considerably less. It therefore makes considerable sense financially to expand Gatwick. It makes considerable economic sense to expand Gatwick. The report repeatedly says that Heathrow is doing very well and should effectively be encouraged and allowed to continue to do very well, without actually giving any real emphasis on the ability of Gatwick to improve the whole economic performance, and not just in the immediate vicinity, but of South London and of the area to the south of Gatwick as well. One might think that the Silicon Valley and Thames Valley is doing pretty well for itself as it is. There are also, of course, the environmental impacts we've talked about. Whereas the environmental impacts of expanding Gatwick are relatively low due to the fact that most of the flights fly out over rural areas, invariably in Heathrow the flights will fly in and out over densely populated urban areas with all the problems we've heard of. First of all, of aircraft noise. Secondly, of pollution, in particular of NOx. We've seen recently the Planet Earth decision. And that is just sort of brushed away. There was an extra consultation for a couple of weeks, then just brushed away by the Airports Commission as if this wasn't a problem, when in fact it is a very serious problem in making sure that we adhere to the correct NOx classifications. And one of the biggest generators of that at the moment, let alone if it were to be expanded, is Heathrow Airport. And finally, we have the issue of what the public wants. And whilst, of course, there is some local opposition to Gatwick Airport being expanded locally, there is quite a lot of public support for it as well. Whereas there are very, very few people indeed, apart from Heathrow Airport Limited, who actually are in favour of expanding Heathrow. We've already heard that Sadiq Khan changed his mind. Well, for once I agree with Sadiq on that. Heathrow Airport is not a good option. It is not widely supported. So why, you may ask, does the Commission actually support it? Well, it is actually quite interesting when you read the report that the Commission is an obsessive supporter of the hub airport proposal. It suggests that Heathrow, and indeed the country, and London could only improve if people are able to fly into Heathrow, break with lots of pollution, have a cup of coffee in the departure lounge and then fly out somewhere else. It thinks that's a great idea. And it thinks that is important because it's only by transfer passengers at Heathrow would be able, it says, to increase the number of routes it offers and increase our connectivity. Oh, well, I have actually got news for the Commission. These figures are nowhere in the report that I can find, despite crawling through all 344 pages of it. Funnily enough, the number of transfer passengers at Heathrow is on a long-term decline. It goes up and down. In the period from 2001 to 2010, it nearly halved. It went up after that and then declined subsequently. Why is that? Why are the number of transfer passengers, which are a very, very small proportion, declining? Well, it's because of changes in the airline industry. I was there a few years ago. I was very surprised to discover that the queue next to me, which is going off to Nairobi, a large number of American accents. Why? Well, that was because at the time there was no direct flight between New York and Nairobi. Now there is, because Kenyan Airlines have bought a fleet of Boeing 787s and are flying those new thin routes, something the Commission specifically denies. Likewise, British Airways have bought a new fleet of Boeing 787s, and of course one of those now flies directly to Austin, Texas, so you can go and see LBJ's library without changing planes anywhere. I did it myself and it's thoroughly recommended. So we are seeing a considerable change in the way that people fly. Hub-and-spoke airports were all the rage in the United States a few years ago. Now you have places like Cincinnati Airport where terminals specifically built, specifically designed for hub-and-spoke operations are in mothballs and being closed down because people are preferring to fly direct. And anyway, what does the Commission finally end up suggesting that quite a lot of this extra capacity should be used for? It's not for international travellers. It wants to have publicly subsidised flights into Heathrow from various UK regional airports, rather than looking to see whether or not we should actually have direct flights from those airports to international destinations, rather than giving people from those areas the hassle of changing planes at Heathrow. This report is clearly quite fundamentally flawed. The proposals require, as I've just said, not just substantial public subsidy in infrastructure, they also require an ongoing public subsidy to keep the place going. I simply cannot understand why the Commission has come to the conclusion in the face of all the facts. It has done, and we need to make sure that we continue to present the facts and to continue to resist this ridiculous set of proposals.
I now ask, is this motion carried unanimously? Agreed.